Emily Carter, a 45-year-old high school English teacher, lived in a quiet, picturesque town in Texas. Her life had been shaped by resilience and compassion, especially after she made the decision to adopt Jake, a bright-eyed 10-year-old boy. 12 years ago, Jake's parents had tragically passed away in a car accident, leaving him orphaned and adrift. Emily, who had always wanted to be a mother but never had the chance, saw an opportunity to give Jake a loving home. Over the years, they had built a life together, filled with laughter, shared dreams, and the occasional challenges that came with raising a teenager. Now, at 22, Jake was a college student studying engineering at a nearby university. He was ambitious, hardworking, and determined to make Emily proud. Emily, on her part, had always been his biggest supporter, cheering him on through every milestone and setback. Their bond was strong, forged through years of mutual trust and understanding. Still, Emily often worried about Jake. She could see the weight of his ambitions on his shoulders, the pressure he put on himself to succeed. One Friday evening, Emily was sitting in her cozy living room, grading papers, when she heard the front door open. It was Jake, home for the weekend. She looked up and immediately noticed something was off. His usual cheerful demeanor was replaced by a somber expression. His shoulders slumped as if carrying an invisible burden. "Hey, Mom," Jake greeted her, his voice quieter than usual. "Hey, sweetheart," Emily replied, setting her papers aside. "How was your week?" Jake hesitated, then shrugged. "It was okay. Can we talk later? I just need to clear my head." Emily nodded. Though her concern deepened, she knew Jake well enough to sense when something was bothering him. Later that night, as she was preparing for bed, she heard a soft knock on her bedroom door. "Come in," she called out. Jake stepped inside, his face etched with exhaustion and something else, something Emily couldn't quite place. "Mom, I can't sleep," he admitted, his voice trembling slightly. Emily patted the edge of her bed. "Sit down, Jake. What's on your mind?" And so began a conversation that would change their relationship forever. Jake sat down on the edge of Emily's bed, his hands clasped tightly together. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the ceiling fan. Emily could see the turmoil in his eyes, the way his shoulders tensed as if he were carrying the weight of the world. She reached out and gently placed a hand on his arm. "What's going on, Jake?" she asked softly, her voice filled with concern. Jake hesitated, his gaze fixed on the floor. I failed, Mom," he finally admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't make it to the finals of the engineering competition. I worked so hard, and I let everyone down." Emily's heart ached for him. She knew how much this competition meant to Jake, how much he had poured into it. She moved closer, her hand still resting on his arm. "Jake, look at me," she said gently. He slowly raised his eyes to meet hers, and she could see the vulnerability there, the fear of disappointing her. "You didn't let anyone down," she said firmly. "You're human, and sometimes things don't go the way we want them to. That doesn't mean you're not enough." Jake shook his head, his voice trembling. "But I wanted to make you proud. I wanted to prove that I could do it, that I could be someone you could be proud of." Emily's eyes softened, and she cupped his face in her hands. "Jake, listen to me. You don't have to prove anything to me. I've always been proud of you, not because of what you achieve, but because of who you are. You're kind, you're determined, and you've overcome so much. That's what matters to me." For a moment, Jake just stared at her, his eyes searching hers as if trying to believe her words. Then, slowly, the tension in his shoulders began to ease, and he let out a shaky breath. I don't want to disappoint you," he whispered. "You never could," Emily replied, her voice steady and full of love. "You're my son, and I love you no matter what. That's never going to change." Jake leaned into her embrace, and for the first time that night, he felt a sense of peace. In that moment, their bond deepened, transcending the roles of mother and son. It was a connection built on unconditional love, trust, and the understanding that they were each other's greatest support. Over the next few weeks, something subtle but profound began to change between Emily and Jake. It wasn't a dramatic shift. but rather a series of small moments that added up to something bigger. One evening, Jake came home from college earlier than usual. Instead of retreating to his room like he often did, he lingered in the kitchen, where Emily was preparing dinner. "Need any help?" he asked. Leaning against the counter, Emily looked up, surprised but pleased. "Sure," she said with a smile. "You can chop the vegetables." As they worked side by side, they fell into an easy rhythm, chatting about everything and nothing, his classes, her students, the book she was reading. For the first time in a long while, it felt like they were equals, not just mother and son. Another night, Jake opened up about his struggles with time management and the pressure he felt to excel in his studies. Emily listened without judgment, offering advice only when he asked. It was a far cry from their earlier dynamic, where she often took the lead in their conversations. By the time spring arrived, their relationship had evolved into something deeper and more balanced. They started taking walks together in the evenings, sharing stories and dreams. Emily found herself learning from Jake as much as he learned from her. One particularly memorable evening, they sat on the porch, watching the sunset. Jake turned to her and said, "Thanks, Mom, for everything. I don't think I've ever told you how much I appreciate you." Emily smiled, her eyes glistening. "You don't have to thank me, Jake. I'm just glad we're here together." In that moment, they both realized how much their relationship had grown. It was no longer just about her guiding him, it was about them supporting each other. As individuals and as a family. It was a cool, crisp evening in early March when everything finally came to the surface. Emily and Jake were sitting on the porch, wrapped in blankets, sipping hot cocoa. The stars were out, and the world felt quiet, like it was holding its breath. Jake had been unusually quiet all day, and Emily could sense something was on his mind. She waited patiently, knowing he'd speak when he was ready. "Mom," Jake began, his voice soft but steady. "I've been thinking a lot lately. About us. About everything." Emily turned to him, her expression warm and encouraging. "What's on your mind, Jake?" He took a deep breath, his hands gripping the mug tightly. I don't think I've ever really told you how much you mean to me. You've always been there for me, even when I didn't realize it. And I guess I've been so caught up in my own stuff that I didn't stop to say thank you." Emily's eyes softened, and she reached out to place a hand on his arm. "Jake, you don't have to thank me. Being your mom is the greatest joy of my life." Jake shook his head, his voice trembling slightly. "No, Mom, you don't get it. You've done so much for me. And I've taken it for granted. I've been so focused on my own goals that I didn't stop to think about how much you've sacrificed for me. I want you to know that I see it now. And I'm so grateful." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes, but she smiled through them. "Oh, Jake," she said, pulling him into a tight hug. "You have no idea how much that means to me." They stayed like that for a long time, the silence between them filled with unspoken love and understanding. It was a moment of pure connection, a reminder of how far they'd come and how much they meant to each other. As the seasons changed, so did Emily and Jake's lives. The bond they had rebuilt became the foundation for a new chapter, one filled with hope and possibility. Jake graduated from college that spring, and Emily couldn't have been prouder. She watched him walk across the stage, her heart swelling with a mix of joy and nostalgia. Later, at a small celebration at home, Jake raised a toast. "To my mom," he said, his voice steady but emotional. "You've been my rock, my guide, and my biggest supporter. I wouldn't be here without you." Emily smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "And you've taught me so much, Jake. I'm so proud of the man you've become." In the months that followed, Jake landed his first job in a nearby city. While it meant he'd be moving out, it didn't feel like an ending. Instead, it was a new beginning, for both of them. Emily, inspired by Jake's courage, decided to pursue a long-held dream of writing a book. She'd always loved storytelling, and now, with Jake's encouragement, she finally took the leap. They stayed in touch, calling and texting regularly, and Jake made it a point to visit often. Their relationship had evolved into something deeper, more mature, a partnership built on mutual respect and love. One evening, As they sat on the porch again, Emily turned to Jake. "You know," she said, "I think this is just the start. For both of us." Jake nodded, a smile tugging at his lips. "Yeah, Mom, we've got this." And in that moment, they both knew it was true. Their journey wasn't over, it was just beginning.